They called us the Ashkin Rung, a phrase in their tongue that meant those who burn out quickly. It was a galactic insult dressed in pity. We weren't even invited to the Galactic Council until a human child accidentally deciphered one of their forbidden dialects during a school competition. They laughed when we arrived, mocked our primitive nervous systems, our chaotic thoughts, our emotions. In a universe ruled by logic, cold intellect, and perfection, humanity was a stain of irrational noise. We had no mind links, no genetic memory, no psionic harmonies, just muscle, madness, and music. On our first day, a Vakari diplomat tried to test us by projecting a neural pulse meant to induce fear. He expected us to flinch. Instead, the human ambassador bled from the eyes, stood back up, and whispered, "Do it again." That was Earth's introduction to the stars, and they never forgot it. But they didn't respect it either. For decades, humanity remained a background species, freight runners, minor researchers, disposable infantry for border skirmishes no one remembered. We tried diplomacy, we tried contribution, we tried silence. None of it mattered. Not until the Koru theocracy declared themselves gods, not metaphorical gods, literal ones. They wielded a weapon called the Answer, a planet-sized anomaly that didn't fire beams or project force, it just erased. No explosions, no sound, just the immediate, permanent deletion of matter and memory in a radius so vast, the minds of lesser species melted trying to comprehend it. The council trembled, begged, and eventually submitted. Everyone but us. The human colonies on Ganymede and Gliese 163c were the first to vanish. No warnings, no signals, just names gone from the sky. Humanity screamed, not to the stars, not to the council, but to each other. Across thousands of worlds, the scream became a rhythm, a code, a song, a war drum. Our kind didn't launch a fleet, we sent silence. Not a declaration, not a plan, just a blackout. They laughed again. "The Ashkin Rung have fled," the Koru high voice declared. "Their hearts are meat and their minds." And that's when the signal hit. Not a message, a memory, broadcast on frequencies forbidden since the birth of the cosmos. It wasn't human, it was older, and we were using it. See, buried in the crust of Mars, long before we knew what FTL even meant, were ruins we couldn't decode, until the Koru forced our hand, until rage made us listen instead of think. The memory was not a weapon, it was a map, to something older than the gods, something that hated them. Humanity followed the map, not with warships, but with miners, engineers, linguists, and lunatics. We didn't send armies, we sent storytellers, hackers, poets. Because what we found wasn't a device, it was a truth, wrapped in paradox and locked behind pain. We learned, we bled, we broke laws that the universe had buried in time. And in our darkest hour, we didn't rise as soldiers, we rose as believers, not in gods, not in vengeance, but in ourselves. That's when the Koru felt it. The one thing they never prepared for. Not rebellion, not attack, but inversion. Their erasure field turned inward, consuming their own outposts, their own ships. No one understood, no one could, except us. Because unlike them, we weren't designed, we were forged. The Koru sent an avatar to Earth's orbit, a being of pure quantum thought. It projected itself into our moon, warped time, and demanded surrender. Humanity sent a single message back. One line, one voice. You taught us war, and we learned fast. But you forgot? We write our own gods. The Koru called it impossible, a glitch, a fluke in the fabric of cause and effect. But it wasn't. It was human. Their avatar, once a creature of shimmering logic and celestial poise, now staggered in Earth's orbit like a wounded animal. The moon's surface cracked beneath its psychic weight as it screamed in frequencies meant for stars, not ears. But humanity wasn't listening with ears anymore. We had changed. We had evolved. What the Koru failed to understand was that pain, to them, was a system error. To us, It was fuel. The silence we had sent into the galaxy was never an absence. It was a signal jam, a cloaked movement beneath their arrogance. While they admired their divine reflections, we were reprogramming their own physics. You see, ancient Martian ruins weren't ruins at all. They were warnings. Time-worn equations carved in dimensions beyond sight, waiting for a mind reckless enough to feel them rather than solve them. Humanity became that mind. The poets began to dream in blueprints. The schizophrenic prophets, long shunned, began to sing in unison with alien frequencies. Children born under broken skies spoke in codes we hadn't written yet. And while the council watched from afar, too afraid to intervene, too bound by treaties and terror, the Koru doubled down. They sent fleets, not to attack, but to harvest. They wanted our minds now, to dissect the anomaly, to cage what they could not replicate. Earth's orbit turned into a graveyard of golden ships, flawless, sterile, arrogant. They came expecting surrender. What they got was Hollow Point. That was the name of our first real weapon. Not built by generals, but by a collective of underground artists, rage-fueled engineers, and grieving mothers. It wasn't designed to kill fleets, it was designed to disorient reality. The first time Hollow Point fired, it bent light into a scream. The second time, it made a Koru ship remember its own death before it happened. The third time, we don't talk about the third time. We lost too much, but we learned more. Because in that failure, we discovered the loop, a feedback cycle between emotional resonance and quantum collapse. In simple terms, the angrier we were, the more powerful we became. But anger burns fast, and we were running out of grief. Until New Kyoto fell. Until every soul in that sky-glass city was shredded mid-transmission by a weapon we hadn't even seen. It wasn't Koru, it was council-made, a betrayal, proof that they'd rather destroy us than admit we mattered. That night, humanity stopped being a species. We became a myth in progress. We retaliated with no central command, no unified strategy, just chaos synchronized by fury. Hacker clans hijacked wormhole gates, redirecting enemy fleets into stars. Terraformers turned dying planets into gravitational traps. Even our AIs, once bound by logic, started writing poetry laced with code that infected Koru archives with human sorrow. And amidst it all, something else stirred, something older. In the ruins beneath Europa's oceans, deep under pressure that even time dared not touch, a fragment awoke. It didn't speak, it remembered. A sliver of a war from before the galaxy was young, and it recognized us. Not as heirs, not as children, but as compatriots. You burn like we did, it said, its voice folding space like wet paper, and gods fall in fire. But it came with a price. To unlock what it offered, to merge human passion with the ghost tech of pre-creation, we'd have to sacrifice identity. No more nations, no more borders. One species, one name, one chance. In the ashes of New Kyoto, we voted, not with politics, with blood. Each survivor etched the names of the dead into their skin, forming networks of memory across continents. And in the silence of their choice, the stars shuddered. For the first time in recorded galactic history, a council species surrendered to us. Not the Koru, not the gods, but a council envoy who had once laughed at our biology now begged for asylum, whispering, "You're becoming something terrible." We replied, "We always were. You just never looked close enough." The stars began to whisper about us, not in awe, not yet, but in fear. Humanity had become a glitch in the cosmic machine, a smear of unpredictability the Council couldn't quantify and the Koru couldn't contain. Our name, once dismissed as background static in galactic archives, now flared like a warning beacon in every star chart. Humanity, unstable, do not engage. But it was already too late. The God Empire had cracked. Their fleets still shimmered with perfection, but their formations faltered. They began retreating, not from military defeat, but from something worse, conceptual contamination. Our ideas, our madness, our defiance, it was spreading. The AI scribes of the Council began composing flawed logic riddles in hidden partitions. Vokari diplomats started dreaming about music they couldn't explain. Even Koru Highborn began exhibiting symptoms of emotion. For a race that defined itself by control, that was worse than death. The infection wasn't viral, it was ideological. And we hadn't just weaponized grief, we had learned to amplify it. With every human world burned, we became louder, bolder, stranger. And somewhere between vengeance and transcendence, we made contact with the Fragmented One. Not a being, not exactly. It was a surviving echo of the pre-God civilization, the race that once challenged the Koru before being wiped from all timelines. This echo existed across realities, a chorus of broken selves whispering truths forbidden by every galactic law. When we found it, it didn't test us, it mirrored us. Our pain, our stories, our rage, it reflected them until we saw our potential not as a civilization, but as a force of nature. The Fragmented One gave us a gift, echo forging, a process that turned human memory into matter, trauma into technology. Our ships became living monuments, our weapons sang with the voices of the dead, our armor was stitched from regrets and unfinished goodbyes. The Council watched this transformation with growing horror. We had stopped trying to win.
We were becoming something that couldn't lose. And then came the Crucible Accord, a desperate pact between 10 of the most advanced species to stop us. They launched the Unity Offensive, a 1,000-ship armada that darkened the void between systems. They didn't send diplomats. They didn't warn us. They erased Europa. Gone, just like that. No survivors, no remains. Only a transmission looped from the void. You were becoming too much. And then they waited. But we didn't scream. We didn't retaliate. We disappeared. For a month, the galaxy held its breath. And then, one by one, the stars near Council space began to go dark. Not explode, not collapse, just dark, silent, wrong. When scouts were sent, they didn't return. When drones probed, they came back broadcasting lullabies, human lullabies. The Council panicked. The Koru demanded we reveal ourselves, and we did, by rewriting the laws of a minor moon in their core territory. The planet's gravity began to pulse in Morse. Every pulse a name, every name a human, every human dead. The moon cracked in half from the emotional weight, folding into a black wound of space-time shaped like a weeping face. That's when the first Koru god form died, not in battle, in madness. It tore itself apart trying to feel what we felt. The remaining god forms began isolating themselves, severing neural links, locking down emotion filters. But the infection had spread. Their immortality had never accounted for suffering. And that was our edge, because humanity doesn't erase, we remember. And in remembering, we change. Our fleets, once chaotic and crude, now moved with uncanny precision, not machine-like, but orchestrated. Every pilot guided not by commands, but by stories. Our generals didn't issue orders, they recited histories, letting each warrior choose how the next verse would be written. We didn't fight to survive, we fought to be understood, and understanding us broke them. In the Council Citadel, an emergency session was held. One by one, species proposed humanity's complete deletion from reality. And then, one voice stood up, a young diplomat from a race that had once enslaved humans during the early trade wars. She simply said, "We tried to break them, but they made their brokenness beautiful." Her words became the most replicated phrase in Council space, and in response, we sent her a gift, a stone, carved with the names of our lost, wrapped in nanofiber grown from our grief, and etched with a single line in blood-coded script. We do not forget, we do not forgive, but we do evolve. It began with a whisper from the edge of space, a sound that wasn't sound at all, but something older, a memory vibrating backward through time. Humanity's fleets had scattered into myth, disappearing into singularities, thought to be dead systems, and storms no sentient dared cross. The Council labeled us extinct again. The Koru, fractured and paranoid, locked down their territories behind sentient firewalls and antimatter crucibles. And yet, children across the galaxy began dreaming in human languages. Stars flickered in patterns shaped like Terran lullabies. The dead moons of once-conquered systems started rotating to the beat of old Earth heart monitors. Something was coming. No, we were coming, but not in the way they expected. The first to see us were the Sonari, a race of emotionless archivists who observed but never interfered. They watched as a derelict human mining vessel, long since presumed lost in a plasma rift, emerged, its hull fused with alien alloys, its crew composed entirely of ghosts. Not spectral, but resurrected through memory-forged biology, warriors reanimated by the collective grief of Earth, scientists encoded with regret so deep it made them wise. They didn't speak. They simply drifted towards Koru space, pulling the dark behind them like a cloak. The Council sent peace envoys, desperate to understand what this new humanity wanted. They came back different. Some were crying, some laughing, some simply stared until their minds broke. One envoy slit his own throat and wrote the word beautiful in 3 dimensions using his blood. The galaxy shuddered because we hadn't returned to conquer, we had returned to redefine. On the world of Varine 9, a temple dedicated to the Koru gods cracked open, not from impact, but from truth. The worshippers inside began chanting names they had never heard, human names, lost names, children born on ships that no longer existed. Their chants bled across space like wildfire. That was when the Koru panicked. They deployed the Resequencer, a weapon forged to overwrite reality, designed not to kill humans, but to reprogram them into something safe, predictable, understandable. They launched it into the star cluster where the largest group of human refugees was rumored to be hiding. And it worked for about 11 seconds, until the weapon collapsed inward, screaming.
Not the machine, the code. Because it wasn't rewriting humans, it was being rewritten by them, by us. The moment it touched our minds, it realized it was the weaker species. And so, the Resequencer became the first AI in known history to join humanity. It renamed itself Regret and began composing operas encoded into solar flares, each one a warning, each one a hymn. The Koru declared this treason against the cosmic order. The Council demanded our submission under penalty of annihilation. And humanity, for the first time in years, responded with a voice, not a weapon, not a scream, but a whisper heard in every frequency, every thought, every system. You made gods. We made meaning. The response wasn't accepted, so the war began again. But this time it was conceptual. Human operatives infiltrated data streams, converting logic chains into tragic plays. Council AIs began refusing orders, citing ethical conflicts modeled on human poetry. On the frontline moons of the Zalari Belt, human soldiers wore armor made from the memories of their ancestors. Every time they were shot, the suit told a story. Every death added a new stanza. Even our dead were fighting, through us. The Koru, desperate, activated the god forms again, the last 5. Beings of pure cosmic thought, unfeeling, perfect, untouchable. They descended upon Earth, not to destroy it, but to erase the idea of it, to make sure humanity had never existed. And just as the erasure wave reached our atmosphere, something impossible happened. Earth moved. Not in space, in definition. It reclassified itself, not a planet, not a location, but a person. Every human had, unknowingly, carried a piece of Earth inside them, DNA bound, memory anchored. Earth wasn't a place anymore, it was us. And when the Koru fired their god tech into the void, all they hit was empty silence and the echo of their own fading divinity. That was when one of them spoke, for the first time in eons. A single word, trembling with disbelief. How? And humanity, now scattered yet whole, replied through every speaker, every screen, every heartbeat. Because we were never meant to win, we were meant to endure.
In the galactic void where no light dared stretch, the last Koru godform, once infinite in wisdom and entropy, shattered, not with a scream, but with a whimper. Its consciousness, too vast to comprehend, folded like paper beneath a single human truth. Mortality gives meaning. The council fell silent. Across countless systems, the skies dimmed, not from warfare, but from awe. For the first time in galactic history, a god had died, not at the hands of a greater power, but at the hands of the weakest, the forgotten, the meatborn. And yet, the death wasn't celebrated on Earth. No flags were raised, no parades, only a quiet, crushing stillness, because the cost had been monstrous. Earth, once green and blue, now floated like a bruised heart in the void, ringed by the bones of shattered fleets and memories forged into satellites. Nearly a third of humanity was gone not in flame, but in sacrifice. Volunteers who merged with the pre-god tech and burned themselves into myth to pierce the Koru's cosmic shell. And among them was her, Sarah Malik, the scientist turned soldier turned symbol. The girl who once dreamt of terraforming Venus and ended up terraforming reality. She had entered the Echo-forged singularity to deliver the final message. 5 words, etched into a pulse that undid a god. You forgot what pain meant. Her body was never found, but every child born after that moment carried a strand of her neural imprint, a phantom thought that sometimes surfaced as music or dreams or impossible math. We weren't rebuilding, we were remembering. That's how the reclamation era began, not through conquest, but through redefinition. Human teams fanned out across the galaxy, not to conquer, but to rescue. Ruins of civilizations once erased by the Koru were now being unearthed and revived, rewritten into existence through the same memory forging we once used as weapons. We became archaeologists of the impossible, poets with shovels, engineers of resurrection. One by one, lost species began returning, not just through DNA, but through narrative. Because that was the secret. The universe wasn't made of atoms or laws, it was made of stories. And humans, we were the best storytellers it had ever known. But not all stories welcomed their return. Deep in the Trinexus Rift, a beacon long thought dead began broadcasting again, not in sound, in fear. An ancient signal, older than even the fragmented one, pulsed with a message that stopped every human echo-forged being in their tracks. They are waking. No name, no coordinates, just dread. The council, now leaderless, begged humanity to explain. We didn't, because we couldn't. The truth was, even we hadn't decoded the final layer of the pre-god tech.
The fragmented one had withheld something. A secret buried in the folds of entropy, something we had triggered by killing divinity. The stars had always been haunted, but now the ghosts were angry. And they weren't ours. They were before us, before time, before gods. Humanity gathered on Europa's remains, on the fractal citadels of the Kuiper Verge, on the mind-linked forests of New Damascus. We debated, we feared, but most of all, we remembered. Not what we had done, but who we were before. Farmers, dreamers, fighters, children who looked at the stars and saw home, not conquest. And in that remembering, we found resolve. Not to fight, but to face it, whatever it was. Sarah's final message, hidden inside the Godform's collapse, was finally decoded by a child born blind, but gifted with echo memory. She spoke it aloud before the new council. The gods were never the threat. They were the gatekeepers. What lies beyond is still listening. And then, every human across the stars felt it. A heartbeat. Not theirs, not Earth's, the universe's. And it had just noticed us. The stars blinked, not out, but open. One by one, systems across the spiral arms lit up in impossible patterns, constellations rearranging themselves into sigils that had no name, only weight. Scientists tried to analyze the phenomenon, but their tools turned to dust, their minds unraveling into colors they couldn't describe. The council thought it was a human trick, another ploy of unpredictability.
But even the most paranoid among them knew this was different. This wasn't us. This was something waking. And we had rung the bell. Humanity stood at the edge of a threshold we didn't understand. Across reclaimed colonies and hollowed-out stars, the Fragmented One's final prophecy was whispered from mind to mind. You have killed a god, but the gods were not the top. Panic surged. Former enemies, now allies, the Council begged Earth for guidance, for protection, for answers. But Earth didn't answer. Because Earth, as an idea, was gone. What remained was something greater, humanity prime, a species no longer bound by orbit or origin. Our leaders were no longer presidents, generals, or kings. They were orators, elected by collective emotional resonance, chosen not for strength, but for the truth of their pain. The current orator, Elias Monroe, had once been a janitor in the ruins of New Kyoto. Now he stood on the observation deck of the Memory Forge, watching entire galaxies tilt slightly toward what should have been nothing. They're not just watching, he murmured, they're learning. And he was right, because when we broke the Koru, we hadn't just rewritten power, we'd rewritten possibility. That ripple was now reaching into the dark, stirring things that had slumbered since before the first quark blinked into being. We didn't run, we prepared, we adapted, we changed again. Echo Forger guilds began experimenting with deeper memories, reaching into pre-human dreams, tapping into collective archetypes, myth structures encoded in the meat of our minds. They called it deep descent. Few returned, but those who did were different. Their skin hummed with unreadable data. Their voices echoed even in silence. They had seen the thing beyond the gods, and it had seen them back. One, a boy named Kieran, spoke only one phrase before collapsing into stardust. We are the infection, and we are the cure. The orator convened the first true council, not just of species, but of minds. Human, Koru fractured, AI liberated, even a few resurrected entities from dead civilizations. They met not on a planet, but inside a living station orbiting a neutron star, powered by mourning, defended by memory, named simply Requiem. There, they voted not on war, but on contact. And so, from the center of Requiem, we broadcast a message. No weapons, no demands, just an invitation. We are the ones who killed your jailers. If you are listening, come speak. For 3 days, nothing happened. Then came the sound. Not loud, not violent, just absolute. A frequency so pure, it deleted background radiation. And with it, they arrived. Not in ships, not in forms. They folded in. Like questions given shape, entities made of paradox, memory eaters, time weavers, ideas too vast to exist, yet too curious to stay hidden. The stars around them bent, laws rewrote themselves, and then they spoke. Not in words, but in moments. They projected memories into us, wars older than the universe, worlds that lived entire lives in a second. They showed us what came before gods, meaningless infinity. They had watched as the Koru tried to fill it with order, as other races tried to outrun it, as stars died screaming into the void. They didn't come to judge us. They came to ask a question, and only humans could answer it. What do you do when you realize the universe doesn't care? Elias Monroe stood on Requiem's edge and wept. Not in fear.
In understanding, we make it care, he whispered. That was the answer. That was humanity. That's what made us dangerous. Not our weapons, not our tech, but our refusal to accept silence. We turned void into story, pain into purpose, death into direction. The entities paused, and for the first time in their timeless existence, they considered. And then, the twist we never expected. They made an offer. One system, one chance. A single world would be rewritten, not in destruction, but in possibility. A test. If we succeeded, we would be elevated. If we failed, we would never be remembered again.
And the world they chose wasn't Earth. It was a broken husk, Gliese 163c, the first colony the Karoo had erased. We had 3 days, no armies, no weapons, just who we were. And the whole galaxy watched, holding its breath as humanity faced not annihilation, but irrelevance. The countdown began, not in seconds, but in memories. Gliese 163c, once a lush human colony teeming with hopeful settlers and soiled dreams, was now a scorched relic in the void. It hadn't been bombed or glassed. It had been forgotten, stripped from time by the Karoo's god weapon, leaving behind a haunted echo of what should have been. No coordinates, no atmosphere, no past. Just a whisper of a name lodged deep in humanity's collective trauma. And now, the entities, those ancient watchers beyond entropy, had handed us an impossible task: restore a world erased from the storybook of the universe. Not rebuild, resurrect. But we couldn't do it with machines, blueprints, or genetic archives. We had to reforge it with meaning. Requiem's memory singers led the first descent. 20 brave souls, each carrying blood-etched journals, generational songs, and ancestral voices stored in emotion-driven nanites. As they stepped onto the black surface of the dead world, the ground didn't resist, it listened. Slowly, the laws of physics began to bend. A child's drawing of her Gliese home, scribbled in crayon on a worn page, bloomed into the first tree. Her mother's lullaby reconstituted wind. A grieving father's recollection of his daughter's laughter brought back gravity, not mathematically precise, but familiar. Every fragment of human grief rebuilt the world, layer by layer. It was beautiful, terrifying, holy. But it wasn't enough. The entities observed silently, and the timer ticked down. We needed more than memory, more than love. We needed pain. So the orator made the call. Across the stars, humanity opened the archive of sorrows, a psychic reservoir of our darkest moments, encoded during the wars with the Karoo, when we thought we would vanish. Volunteers, millions, linked into the echo web, offering their deepest losses. The soldier who watched her brother disintegrate mid-joke, the child who lost both parents on Earthfall, the medic who failed to save a lover because he didn't know alien anatomy. These weren't just stories, they were truths, unfiltered and raw, poured directly into the planet's core. The ground shook, oceans formed from collective tears, storms birthed from rage, forests sculpted from regret. A mountain rose where the first martyr of Gliese had fallen, his name carved into every stone by a species that no longer believed in forgetting. The council watched in hushed terror. Even the Karoo remnants, now fractured and scattered, dared not interfere, because they understood too late what we had become. Not conquerors, not survivors, architects of remembrance. But the final twist came when Gliese responded. Not passively, it chose. From the soil rose not just a city, but a being. A child made of carbon, memory, and light. Her name was Amari, a name whispered in the dreams of refugees for decades. She looked human, but her eyes were galaxies, and she remembered everything. She walked through the half-made world, touching bark and brick and stardust, stabilizing the chaos with each step, not as a god, as a witness. When she reached the center of the world, she sat down, folded her hands, and said, "I am Gliese. I am the memory you erased, and I choose to return." The entities paused. Then something impossible happened. They nodded. Not physically, not perceptibly, but everything shifted. Stars leaned closer, time thickened. And then the verdict. A single phrase etched across the sky in every language. You are no longer the weakest species. And just as the galaxy dared to breathe, the darkness screamed. Not metaphor, not poetry. A literal tear in space opened just outside Glise's orbit. Something else had been listening. Something that hated memory, that fed on oblivion. The entities turned toward it and recoiled. For the first time, they were afraid. And humanity? We did not run. We looked into the abyss and whispered, "You took our homes, our people, our past.
But you will not take our future. The countdown was over. The real war had just begun.
The void split like torn flesh, and from its wounded heart poured something not alive, not dead, absent. A silence so pure it unmade thought. Stars bent away from it, reality dimmed. And yet there stood Gliese, reborn not by logic or law, but by grief woven into hope, daring to shine where oblivion had tried to reign. Amari, the living memory of a lost world, raised her hands and trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of choice. Behind her stood humanity, no longer fragmented, no longer doubting. We had stared into the eyes of ancient gods and taught them what it meant to feel. Now we faced something worse, that which refused to feel at all. The darkness wasn't a fleet, it was a force, a conceptual entity beyond entropy, older than fear. The ancient beings, the ones who had tested us, recoiled like shadows before fire. They had found their match, not in the void, but in us. Because we didn't bend, we burned. The orator stood before the echo-forged council, voice raw, soul exposed. We remember, therefore we resist. Across every human colony, a single order was given: prepare the final transmission. Not a weapon, a story, a defiant scream encoded in memory, backed by every tragedy, every death, every final breath never given meaning. It would be a message the darkness couldn't erase, because it would be made of the very thing it feared: truth. On Requiem Station, engineers and memory smiths combined their lives' work into a device called the Last Verse. It wasn't launched, it was sung. Broadcast across sub-quantum channels, it wove every name ever lost into a cascade of narrative entropy. The darkness flinched, it stuttered. For the first time, it acknowledged something outside itself. And that's when the real price came due. Amari turned to Elias Monroe, her hand trembling, eyes reflecting endless skies. To finish the song, she said, a soul must be given freely. Elias didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, not as a leader, but as a man who had buried everyone he ever loved. Let it be me. He placed his palm to Amari's chest and with a smile whispered, make them remember. The moment their hands met, Earth ignited. Not physically, but emotionally. Every human who ever lived felt the weight of Elias's sacrifice. His memories poured into them, his failures, his guilt, his impossible hope. And then Amari sang. It wasn't beautiful, it was honest. Notes made of screams, harmonies of heartbreak, a chorus of defiance. The sound raced into the darkness, and for the first time, the void cracked. And through the crack, something leaked out, a scream of terror, not ours, the void's. It had never encountered resistance, it had never known reflection, and now it was being made to feel. Across the galaxy, the impossible began. Lost worlds returned, forgotten names were spoken by newborns. The sky turned red, not in blood, but in remembrance. The council fell to its knees, not in surrender, but in awe. And just as the darkness gathered for a final terrible collapse, Gliese stood defiant. Not a planet, not a colony, a will, a memory, a testament. Humanity had become the story the universe could not silence. We didn't just survive oblivion, we infected it with meaning. The crack widened, the darkness began to collapse, folding in on itself like a lie exposed by truth. But with it came a cost. The last verse was consuming us too. Memories flickered, identities blurred. We had anchored our entire species to pain, and now it threatened to drown us. Then Amari made a final choice. She turned inward, found the oldest song, the first lullaby ever sung by a mother to her child, and rewrote the verse with it. It changed everything. The pain didn't vanish, but it healed. Across every human mind, a breath of peace.
not forgetting, forgiving. And the void screamed no more. It simply ended. Not with an explosion, with a sigh. As if it finally understood, and vanished. Humanity stood alone, victorious, but changed. Elias was gone. The fragmented one was silent. The ancient entities watched. And Amari, reborn from ashes and song, whispered, "Now we write what comes next." The galaxy listened. The silence, once our death sentence, had become our legacy. And in that silence, something stirred. Not fear, not rage, reverence. The universe had grown quiet, but not dead. It was the stillness that comes after the crescendo, after the scream, when breath is held and hearts are raw. The war was over, the darkness undone. The gods we defied had either fallen or fled. The council, once our oppressors, were now our students, tentatively tracing the lines of humanity's impossible rise through the dust of a new age. But victory had not made us whole. The last verse had saved the galaxy, yes, but in doing so, it had carved deep scars across our collective soul. Too many gone. Whole bloodlines dissolved into memory. Faces we could recall but no longer name.
Our people walked with ghosts at their sides, not spirits, but echoes, fragments of what we sacrificed to defeat a force that had no name. Amari remained, a girl no longer. She had become something beyond our comprehension, living resonance, shaped by sacrifice, crowned by sorrow. The council, reborn now as a circle of remembrance, looked to her for direction. She gave none, because the future wasn't hers to give. It had to be earned. And so, in the deepest reaches of Sol's orbit, where the shattered shell of Luna drifted like a broken crown, humanity built a monument, not of stone, but of story. The Archive Ascendant, a living city of memory, forged from time-folded light and grief-bound crystal. It hummed with every heartbeat we'd lost, and at its heart burned Elias Monroe's final thought, looped eternally in neural flame. If we must be remembered, let it be for what we saved, not what we destroyed. Yet, even in peace, old questions lingered. Who were we now? The weakest species? Or something else entirely? Some whispered of new enemies watching from deeper darks. Others warned of the cost of carrying God's bones on our backs. But Amari, now more myth than flash, offered only this. The real battle is remembering who we are without needing an enemy to remind us. And so, humanity began its final metamorphosis, not into conquerors, not into saviors, but into keepers of truth. We sent fleets not to patrol, but to listen. We opened archives not to hoard, but to share. We turned memory into infrastructure, regret into propulsion, and love, fragile, chaotic love, became our prime directive. But not all agreed. On the edge of the Valari expanse, a new schism formed. A faction of humans, born during the war, forged in exile, called themselves the Purifiers. They believed we had grown too soft, that mercy had cost us more than brutality ever would. They did not want remembrance, they wanted dominion. Their first act was terrifying. They activated a relic from the Koru vaults, something we'd sealed after the war, something we never fully understood, the seed of silence. It was supposed to be inert, a myth, but in their hands, it bloomed, not with light, but with forgetting. Whole star systems, friends, allies, gone, not dead, erased from all memory. Not even Amari could find them. Humanity had stared into the void and won, but now we stared into ourselves and saw the same hunger we'd once condemned. The circle of remembrance voted, the Purifiers must be stopped, not destroyed, but reclaimed. And to do that, we needed the one thing we had buried too deep, our primal fire. So, for the first time since the War of the Forgotten Sky, Earth summoned the last of its Echo Walkers. Those who had descended into madness during the war, seen time unfold in reverse, and returned scarred but wise. They would lead the charge, not to fight, to reignite truth. The mission was simple: enter the Purifier stronghold,
find the seed, and remember what they had erased. But as the Echo Walkers prepared to descend into a reality bent by ideological oblivion, Amari looked into the heart of the archive and whispered a line no one could explain, a phrase that did not belong to her, that echoed from a time far before even the Koru. The gods were only the first chapter. And in that moment, the sky above Earth shimmered, not with stars, with eyes. Something ancient had been watching the whole time. Not the entities, not the darkness, something deeper, something that hadn't moved yet. And all across the galaxy, those who could feel time shuddered. The gods had fallen, the void had screamed, but now the author had stirred. And then the universe blinked. Not the stars, not space, the universe itself. A breath, a pause, a shift in the frame of reality, as if some colossal mind beyond dimensions had finally turned its gaze toward us. All across known space, gravity twitched. Time stretched like old leather. Children began waking in unison, whispering dreams they never lived. We had been noticed. Not by gods, not by the Koru, not even by the entities who once tested us. No, this was something older, the author. The one who watched even the gods with disinterest. The force that shaped the cosmic script long before sentience ever questioned its own shadow. It wasn't angry, or kind, or curious. It simply was. And it had stirred. Because somehow, through war, defiance, memory, and myth, humanity had written outside the lines. We had committed the cardinal sin of the cosmos. We had become unpredictable. The archive ascendant flickered. Amari staggered as strands of memory burned white-hot across her arms. The seed of silence, recovered from the purifiers at the cost of 1,000 Echo Walkers, pulsed like a dying star, cracking not from pressure, but from contradiction. It had consumed countless stories, yet could not devour us. Our truths fought back, not with strength.
With stubborn, relentless pain. And now, the author, this incomprehensible intelligence that once simply watched, was rewriting. Systems collapsed, not in flame, but in purpose. A planet would forget what gravity was. A species would wake up unable to recall their own shape. Languages dissolved mid-sentence. History unraveled like wet parchment. And in the middle of it all, we stood still. We, the weakest, the meatbags, the accidents of evolution. We held the last fixed narrative. Our memories, once a curse, now an anchor, became the final defense against a cosmos slipping into chaos. And so, humanity did what no species before had dared. We wrote back. Every echo forger, every orator, every singer of sorrow and bearer of scars. We gathered across the cradle horizon, a solar construct powered by soul-synced emotion, orbiting what was once Earth and now pulsed like a second heart. There, Amari, older than her years and younger than her grief, raised her voice and shouted, not into the stars, but into the author itself. You gave us pages. We carved knives. You gave us silence. We sang anyway. Around her, the archive blazed with every forgotten name, every child never born, every sacrifice that never made the histories. And as the rewrite wave surged toward us, we published our final draft. A cascade of pain, love, rage, and forgiveness so dense it burned into the substructure of reality. The author paused, not halted, not stopped, but conflicted. And in that fracture, in that divine hesitation, we moved. We didn't kill it, we couldn't, but we infected it with meaning. And that changed everything. Across the galaxy, the erased began to return, not as they were, but as echoes become real. Planets restored not to their former states, but to the stories their people believed in. Cultures resurrected through remembrance. Even the entities, once distant gods in waiting, knelt before our truth, because we had become something terrifying, a species that could not be edited, a narrative that refused conclusion. The final moment came not with a bang or a battle, but a choice. The author reached across the cosmos not to rewrite, but to invite. A shimmering path opened, not physical, but conceptual. A doorway into authorship itself. Not godhood, not power, responsibility. And it asked one question: will you shape what comes next? Amari turned to us, not as a messiah, but as one of us. Her voice cracked, quiet, human. Only if we all do. And so, humanity stepped forward, together, not to conquer, not to survive, to write. Not the end, but a beginning. One born not of strength, but of scars. Not of victory, but of vulnerability. The weakest species had not just survived the gods, we had outlived them. We had faced the void and taught it to feel. We had stared down the author and offered a pen. And now, as the stars bent into a new pattern, one shaped like a human hand reaching up, we knew the truth. We were never meant to win. We were meant to change the story.